Alright guys, I probably pissed you off by the title and the thumbnail. Before you come attacking me, let me just explain my points. I've been in the hobby since the EX era, and I've collected and actively played all the way through. I had a short break in Sun and Moon, and then I was back to it towards the end. So yeah, I've seen it all. I've seen people come and go from the hobby. I've seen what the community in the hobby looks like through all these years. So I'm not just like some post Logan Paul era collector. Let me explain my reasoning why I think that scalping, quote unquote, now I don't directly mean, like, I don't agree with scalping, but let me explain why the fact that there is scalpers is a healthy sign for the hobby, and it keeps a lot of these players involved and a lot of these collectors in the hobby. So yeah, let me get into my reasoning. So we're going to try to go over this really quick, this first part, but if you weren't around during like the EX and Wizards of the Coast era, I was more so in the EX era, but during Wizards of the Coast, everyone was new to Pokemon. It was a new concept. Cards had value because a lot of people did not own all the cards. And this created a sense of value and a sense of like belonging because you wanted to be a part of a community, you wanted to trade with people, etc. Now, Wizards of the Coast overprinted these sets. That's why there's so many base set cards out still. That's why when you go on Reddit, every time you see someone post like, I found my collection, my grandma's attic, basements, friends, blah, blah, blah. It's always Wizards of the Coast cards in the binder. Now, you rarely ever see EX era cards, Diamond and Pearl, Black and White. Um, there's, some people have Sun, like, people don't really post Sun and Moon as like a vintage collection, but you get the point. What I'm trying to make is that most people's collection is from that era, and that same era has been repeated, I would say, 3 times now, with that being one of them. And the other two, I'm going to explain what happened. The other two would be X and Y, and then end of Sun and Moon, Sword and Shield era. So that's why I have this pulled up here. That's why Dragon Frontiers, like EX era sets like this, I'm just using this in it as an example. There's cheap cards, expensive set. So if you guys know Primetime Pokemon, I've been watching him since the beginning, and I would go to his channel, look up Primetime Pokemon fan mail videos. What you're going to see is back then when the hobby was dead, and I did this too with people that I met online, people would send in Gold Star cards, EX cards in abundance. Like, it wasn't just someone sending in like a little V card from Sword and Shield. It's like the equivalent of sending in like an alt art for no reason. And we would do this on these forums in these communities where we would do like, we would send fan mail to each other or do these trades, and there was no risk because these cards had little to no value. So you could meet someone and, send them a care package with cards, or like you would trade EX card for EX card and throw in like bonus hollows, which were big at the time because we only had EXs and hollows, just as like a little thank you. That's how little value it had. So it was more so about like the art in the community. Now, the issue with this is that Pokemon was dead then. So if you wanted Pokemon to overprint again, there's a high chance that you yourself, and I'm not, directly talking to you, the viewer, but that a lot of people would leave the hobby because when cards don't have value, people leave the hobby. There's no reason to be a part of it. Even if you are collecting for the art or collecting because it looks cool, a majority of the people collecting now are only here because cards have value, which generated hype, because of the card's value. That's why people are back in the hobby. So yeah, if you don't believe me, go to Primetime Pokemon's fan mail videos. You're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. Now, let's fast forward. So after the EX era, some people started to come back during the Diamond and Pearl because the anime and the game was really big. And then it died out really quick. And then we moved in, like Heart Gold and Soul Silver, people that come back in the game. But I'm telling you, there was like nobody collecting cards back then. And then we slowly transitioned to Black and White. Again, people were playing the game. The TCG was really, really dead. There was just not a lot of people playing or collecting. So back then, boxes would move up slightly in price, but you could get, like, even in like 2014 and 15, I remember back in 2015, I was buying like Korean booster boxes And Japanese boosts are more so Korean. Like at that time, they're like $8 a box. Japanese were dirt cheap. I forget how much it was back then, but like what I'm trying to say is boxes then in other languages were cheap. Older boxes were still cheap. Like you could get a Neo box for like $140 like 10 years later. So nothing held value, and a lot of people were not in the hobby because of that. It wasn't until the X and Y era when a lot of people came back because of the hype generated from Pokemon Go. And the issue with this is that everyone came in the hobby, the same exact thing that we're seeing now, the same thing we saw during Logan Paul. Everyone came in, Pokemon overprinted, the hobby died out again. No cards had value, nothing had value. It was not fun to collect. Um, like Roaring Skies, they overprinted this because of the Shaman card. The normal Shaman EX was so playable. The card was like $40. I think I don't know how high it got, but it was ridiculous. Um, you could probably look that up for the exact price. I just remember it being crazy. They printed this into the ground. They printed every other set in the ground, and yeah, people left the hobby. So without staying on the X and Y era too much, we basically saw the same thing that happened during the WotC era. Now, fast forward again to the Sword and Shield era, we saw the same exact thing, except Pokemon didn't necessarily overprint. But what we saw is as soon as the card value died out, like at the beginning of Scarlet and Violet, everyone left the hobby. So all the people that were there because of the card prices left, and the hobby kind of got boring again. There were still a lot of new people joining, but we kind of saw like a dip in people buying products and whatnot. Now, the fact that Prismatic Evolutions and all these other crazy new sets are coming out, we're seeing the same thing again. So Pokemon is challenged with they can either print to demand and kill the hobby again. It sounds crazy to say, but history keeps repeating itself with Pokemon. We keep seeing it over and over. So there's a high chance if they overprint it, they're going to kill the hobby. And what I mean by that is just a lot of people are going to leave. Obviously, it's not going to fully die out, but they have to find a balance in printing or maybe create sets that are more focused on player oriented cards and then collector oriented and then go about the printing numbers through that. That's up to them. What I'm trying to say is the fact that there are people scalping and that we have these crazy price jumps, it makes the hobby way more engaging to be a part of. Also adds a lot of players because if something goes up in value, it doesn't matter what community you're in, you're going to learn about it. Just like crypto, millions of people still have no idea how crypto works, but they're aware of it and they want to get into it because there's money involved. It's the same thing with Pokemon. If money's involved, people are naturally going to gravitate towards it. And that's going to keep this hobby as fun as it is long term. So a lot of people might disagree now because they're just getting into the hobby. But I'm telling you, as soon as it dies out, you're going to find yourself not buying as much product. If let's just go to Prismatic Evolutions. If these cards were not at the prices they're at, if this Umbreon was $1, yeah, you're gonna have like your crowd of Redditors that is like, oh, I would buy this. I would love if it was only $1, then I could get my hands on it. 90% of those people would not be in the hobby or collecting if it was $1. The only reason they're saying that is because it's $1,900 and they want the card because of that. While they don't agree with the price being that high, that's where the demand. So there's a ton of amazing artwork cards, amazing artwork TCGs that nobody's collecting because there just simply isn't any hype behind it. So what I'm trying to say is a lot of people are just complaining because they haven't been in the hobby long enough and they want what they can't obtain or afford. And that's why people are upset. So if they overprint and everyone stays, then I'll stand corrected. But we've seen it 3 times and every single time people have left. So that's my final point. Peace out, guys.